Welcome to the Type 052 Bravo Luyang-class multi-role destroyer. And I want to say at the output here that we've had to break this lecture up into 2 or maybe even 3 different lectures because it's so long. The Luyang-class destroyer shares the same name with 052, Charlie, Delta, and the future Echoes that they're going to build. So don't be surprised when we use the same name in the next lecture. Okay, but this is the Bravo version of the Luyang-class. Let's get started here. All right. This is basically just a continuation of improving of the Type 052 that we talked about last time. They continue to decrease the radar signature by simply copying what they see happening with European frigates from the FREM to France to the UK. They're increasing the angle and reducing the number of topside corners, if you will, on board these ships. And this has a collective effect of reducing the radar signature of these ships. So this is just a continuation of that. And like our previous one, they only built 2 of these before they made so many improvements. They had to go on to the 052 Charlie, which we'll talk about in another lecture. But for the 2 ships we're talking about today, they were completed in between 2002 and 2004. So they pumped them out pretty quick for being, a big change from previous classes. Both were built in the Shanghai shipyard called the Jiangnan. They're equipped with Russian sensors and Ukrainian engines. Remember, they're stepping away from using Western equipment because of sanctions. And so they're trying to literally connect Russian sensors to their weapons, and they could not do it using Western equipment. The one thing that is completely indigenous, though, are the close-in weapon systems, and we'll take a closer look at that in today's lecture. All right, so here's the shipyard I'm talking about. You can see it on the zoomed-out map there that it is in the the northeastern part of China. This shipyard's been around forever, since the days of sail. It was founded in 1865, and it primarily produces civilian ships, car carriers, cargo ships, oil tankers like you see here. But they also have a dedicated wing that does nothing but build warships connected to the shipyard there as well. China's zero COVID policy continues to hamper production, and we're seeing a lot of problems with them pumping out the units as fast today as they had been, in part due to their zero COVID policy. And that is, it's affecting them the way it is affecting a lot of other countries, but it seems more so in China because they can't seem to get past this COVID issue, and it is affecting their production. But that's where these 2 ships are made, northeastern part of China, very close to the Yellow Sea and Japan. Pumping them out up there. Now that's not where they're going to end up being stationed, by the way, so stay tuned for that. All right, so here is the 052 Bravo by the number. She's 153 meters long, just over 16 meters wide, 1,600 tons. So a good size ship here, and she has quite a punch. Her endurance is about 14,000 miles if she only makes 14 knots, and that's sailing in a straight line. Obviously, whenever you get into combat operations and you're doing anti-submarine warfare, that range severely comes down. It's probably halved just because of the maneuverability that they have to do and speed changes they have to make to accurately, defend themselves and also prosecute, unknown contacts. Her crew is about 250 people, give or take, a few here and there. She has the SAN-12 SAM system. This is similar to the one that we've seen before. But she has 4 quad launchers of the YJ-83, so a total of 16 of these anti-ship missiles, which are pretty capable whenever they're fired in numbers. And that's what the ship is designed to do, is to shoot many anti-ship missiles at once in the same direction. She has a 100 millimeter dual purpose gun on the bow there, the Type 730 Sea Whizzes, 2 of those, and the 4 ASW rockets. I do have a correction coming up on this because I think I used the wrong picture on a previous lecture, so we're going to correct that today. And she has the same helicopter, the Z9C ASW, which is based on a French design. I believe it's the Dolphin is what the French call it, but they made their own version of the Dolphin, and they use it in the PLAN. So the Russian sensors we talked about, they got the top plate 3D radar dome, the bandstand radar, and the front dome fire control radar for controlling their missiles. So that's both search and fire control systems there. All right, so the first one is the Wang Hu DDG-168, commissioned in 2004, and she is stationed in the South China Sea where she does her patrols. The second ship is also in the same area and looks identical, just it's hull number 169, and the name is the Wuhan, PLANS, that's PLAN ship Wuhan, DDG-169. And they both operate there close to the Philippines in the South China Sea area. So this is one of the big changes that they made. You remember the previous ships were using the American LM-2500 engines. They decided, because they couldn't get those anymore, that they would make a deal with Ukraine. And keep in mind, this is going back to the 2000s, so obviously they couldn't do this deal today. And get their DN80 gas turbine engines, which are used in a lot of ships. This generates 3,200 megawatts. China propaganda brags that this is the most, but it's actually not as much as the LM-2500 or even the Rolls-Royce one that the Royal Navy uses. But they claim that it puts out more megawatts. It's simply not true. But it's a good engine. You know, it has the same benefits as all the other turbine engines in that it's quick to start up. So you can take your ship from being tied to a pier and have it going down the river towards open waters in about 20 minutes with whoever's on board. And that's a big plus for these types of engines. This is why everybody's using them now. They're also very efficient too. She has a total shaft horsepower of 57,000, and that's a reasonable expectation for her max speed of around 32 knots. The maritime diesel is a 12V1163 diesel engine. Again, a Ukraine engine. 6,300 kilowatts, 1,200 RPM, so set your sonar systems to search for that. And hotel loads, in other words, it provides electricity as well as can provide power for the propulsion. So you can expect to have at least one of these diesels operating all the time when she's not in port, because that's how she keeps the lights on. So keep an eye open for that 1,200 RPM. All right, so the top plate air and surface search radar, and this is important to understand, this radar does both. It does air search and it does surface search. Very capable, very common radar used on even the smaller ships in the Russian fleet. The MR-750 is very, very common. It's a D and E band radar for those of you that follow radar frequencies, and has a 300-kilometer range. Obviously, for cruise missile detection and stuff, that would be a lot closer. Fighters would be a little bit closer, but large bombers operating at 40,000 feet would be detected at about 300 kilometers. Keep that in mind when we talk about these radar ranges. It is very dependent, a little bit on conditions, and then a lot on what the target is, what it's trying to track. The front dome fire control radar is MR90 or MR90. It's an X-band targeting system. X-band, generally higher frequency, because of that little bit shorter range, but also very precise. And that's the kind of precision you need to guide a weapon onto a target. And that's what this thing does, out to 30 kilometers. Very good radar used in the entire Russian Navy and the PLAN as well. Here we have bandstand, and the top of the bandstand dome kind of blends in with the background here. I apologize for that, but it literally looks like a bandstand, and that's why we call it that. That's the NATO name for it. It is the Type 366 is what China calls it. Russia calls it the MR331 mineral, and the ME is just the variant of it. It is over the horizon capable, which is very cool. It's something that sonar systems can do too. And we'll just leave that there, I guess. But they do the same thing with radar systems that sonar systems do. 35-kilometer range, active and passive modes, and it can detect an incoming cruise missile skimming the sea at about 20 kilometers. So keep in mind, if that's a subsonic missile, they got time to get weapons on range. If that's a supersonic missile or even hypersonic, you're going to have moments, absolute, seconds before it hits. And so keep that in mind whenever they're trying to power up one of these, because she has two of these single rail launchers. Now, keep in mind, the United States was building single rail launchers on our Oliver Hazard Perry frigates, back in, what was that, the 70s? So they're still, with this design in the 2000s, early 2000s, they're going with these single rail launchers that take a long time, upwards of 20 seconds to get a new missile up onto the rail before they can fire it again. So if they're only detecting those incoming missiles with a fire control radar at at 30 or 20 kilometers, they're going to get one off if it's on the rail. And they probably won't have time to even get a second one loaded. But they do have two of these, okay? So keep that in mind. So they could get, if they have two missiles on the rail, two off with no problem. This uses the Russian Buk missile. This is actually the naval variant. This missile is widely used in armies and navies rather. It's configurable for all sorts of environments. So whenever you see the land version, we call that the SA-11 Gadfly. Whenever it's the naval version, we call it the SAN-12 Grizzly. Same missile, different small changes, obviously, for being attached and talking to the fire control systems on the inside, and that's why they're two different variants. But everything else performance-wise is the same missile. The range is out to 32 kilometers, so if it detects that incoming, they could preemptively fire this missile to engage as the missile and the target come into range at 32 kilometers. The ceiling of this missile is about 45,000 feet. These are all public numbers, by the way, so take these with a grain of salt. The performance, generally speaking, is greater than what the public numbers are. But whenever we're talking about regimes like Russia and China, it could be the opposite. They could actually inflate their numbers to make them appear stronger than they are. So we're just going to go with the public numbers, and I'll let you decide how far up or down you want to make these. She does have a 70-kilogram warhead, and again, like I said, single rail launcher. All right, we have the YJ-83. This is the missile in the box launchers. Again, 16 of these things. This is probably the most capable weapon on board. She is an anti-ship, primarily multi-role destroyer. She can do it all, but anti-ship, I believe, is her primary role. These missiles came into service in 1998. We call it the CSSN-8, the exact same missile that we had on the previous lecture. So nothing has changed here. It's still a subsonic, turbojet-driven, sea-skimming, long-range missile. 180 kilometers. That's a very long range for one of these. All right. On the bow, we have the Type 210 100-millimeter naval gun. Again, a copy, a rip-off, if you will, of the French 100-millimeter gun, and it's not very good. This thing has a problem with jamming after just a few rounds all the time, which is part why you see the freaking door open in this picture, because there's always a crew member going in there having to clear freaking jams. It does shoot 90 rounds a minute whenever it doesn't jam. It IOC'd in 1982, has a ballistic range of about 17 kilometers. Effective range, because of the unreliability of it, is only about 12 kilometers. So if it's going to hit something reliably, it's going to be a lot shorter than 17 kilometers. It does have different modes of single fire, and then it can individually select 2-round burst, 3-round burst, all the way up to 6-round burst. So that's interesting. And it has a poor reputation among naval communities because of its jamming problem. If they would get that fixed, then it would be okay. All right, same torpedoes and ASW rocket bombs as other destroyers in her class. Has the triple launchers on both sides, 324 millimeter torpedoes, and then the rocket bomb units, RBUs, on the bow there. This is the very impressively looking, anyway, CIWS, the Type 730. The Chinese did develop this on their own. Well, they claim to, and it does look kind of unique to China. Now, it can be multiple, guided via multiple things. It can be taken over manually and driven by a joystick by an operator. Or it can be radar controlled, and it can has several modes. It has anti-air mode for point defense. It can be put into a surface mode as well for engaging close by, unmanned drones that are in the water or whatever. Has about a 3-kilometer range. The magazine, relatively small. 640 rounds. It'll burn through those quickly. It is completely autonomous, and a closed loop system is important here in that it does not rely on other fire control radars on board the platform to hit its target. It's completely self-contained. And that's really important for these defensive systems, because if they're being employed, that means you're under attack. And it's likely that the ship may have suffered damage and a loss of capability. So as long as it keeps its own radar or optically guided, it can still operate. All right, here we have the 18-cell decoy launcher, and this is where I want to make my correction. I used this photo, or a photo of these launchers, as a ASW launcher, I believe, in a previous video. So please know that these are chaff launchers and combo launchers where they can do flare and chaff. Okay, so those are the Type 726 decoy launchers. This class only has 18 of these. Further modifications will increase this to 24. But here you can see the 18-cell launchers. And that's one way you'll be able to tell this, 052 Bravo from, say, the other ones, is by looking at the number of launchers they have on these things. And there you can see on the bow, it has the SAM launcher there. Okay, this is it in profile. And here you can see they have two SAM launchers, one forward, one aft, single rail, primarily self-defense, launchers, in my opinion. And the SSM missile launchers there are midships. That's her primary. That's what she brings to the fight, is those missiles are going to go out, 180 kilometers and hit something at subsonic speeds. A very utilitarian ship. Everything on this ship has a purpose. You can see clearly that, they've got, the sensors where they need to be, the weapons where they need to be. It doesn't have a lot of anything except the anti-ship missiles. In my opinion, 16 is quite a bit. And yeah, final thoughts. This relatively short lecture as we go through the 052 variants. They were required to move away from NATO systems because of sanctions, but this was also good for China because they're increasingly trying to become self-dependent, using indigenous systems as they go through this century. That's one of their big goals, is they're tired of being reliant on diplomatic relations with other countries to maintain, a weapons supply line. If they ever go to war with someone supplying them equipment, well, they're not going to have that equipment anymore, right? So they need to be able to build their own ships, their own systems, and this is just another step in that direction. The next step is going to be an Aegis-style system, but that's going to come up in the next lecture. Again, that gun on the bow, it might as well be a ballast. It can shoot a couple rounds, and then you can expect it to stop firing until they get someone out there to clear the jam on that loader. But this is the foundation. This is the beginning of a very capable ship coming up called the Type 052 Charlie, where we will greatly improve the performance of this ship. And I look forward to bringing that to you in the next lecture. All right, and that's it. Thank you again to the Patreons here. We have so many people donating and just keeping this project going after 3 years. We're going into year 4 here soon. Actually, yeah, we're over 3 years now, so we're going into 4 years.